The cargo bay of the freighter ship Morning Star was supposed to be empty. Thomas Mitchell knew this because he had personally checked every container and crate before leaving the last station. 23 years of hauling cargo across the outer rim had taught him to be careful about stowaways and contraband. The Empire did not forgive mistakes, especially not from independent traders like him. But as Thomas walked through the dimly lit cargo hold, his boots echoing on the metal floor, he heard something that made him stop. It was a soft sound, almost, like crying. He tilted his head and listened again. There it was, coming from behind the stack of supply containers near the rear wall. Thomas reached for the flashlight on his belt and clicked it on. The bright beam cut through the shadows as he moved closer to the containers. The crying sound stopped immediately, as if whoever was making it had heard him coming. "Hello?" Thomas called out softly. "Is someone back there?" Silence. Thomas moved around the containers slowly, not wanting to scare whoever was hiding. His heart was beating faster now. If someone had snuck onto his ship, it could mean serious trouble with the Imperial authorities. But something about that crying sound made him think this was not a dangerous situation. When he rounded the corner, his flashlight beam fell on something that made him gasp. Huddled behind the containers was a small figure, no bigger than a human, child of maybe 7 or 8 years old. But this was definitely not a human child. The creature had pale blue skin that seemed to shimmer in the flashlight beam. Its eyes were large and dark, taking up much of its face. It had thin arms and legs, and was wearing what looked like torn and dirty rags. When the light hit it, the creature tried to press itself further back against the wall. Thomas lowered his flashlight so it would not shine directly into the creature's eyes. He had seen pictures of different alien species in his trader's manual, and he was pretty sure this was a Valian. They were one of the species that the Mordian Empire had, conquered years ago. "Hey there," Thomas said in the gentlest voice he could manage. "I'm not going to hurt you." The creature looked up at him with those huge dark eyes. Thomas could see that it was shaking, either from fear or cold or both. The cargo bay was not heated very well, and the creature's clothes looked too thin to provide much warmth. Thomas crouched down to make himself seem less threatening. "Are you hurt?" he asked. The creature did not answer, but Thomas could see it was very thin, too thin. When was the last time this little one had eaten anything? Thomas thought about what he should do. Imperial law was very clear about contact with alien species. Unauthorized interaction with conquered peoples was strictly forbidden. If he reported finding the creature, Imperial soldiers would come to collect it. He had heard stories about what happened to aliens who were caught without proper documentation. None of those stories ended well. But looking at this scared, hungry child, Thomas found he could not bring himself to call the authorities. "You look cold," he said instead, "and hungry. Would you like something to eat?" At the mention of food, the creature's eyes seemed to light up just a little. It nodded slowly. Thomas smiled. "Okay. Stay right here. I'll be back in a few minutes." He made his way to the front of the ship where his small living quarters were located. From his food storage, he pulled out some of his emergency rations. They were not fancy, just basic protein bars and dried fruits, but they were nutritious and would fill an empty stomach. He also grabbed a blanket from his bunk and a bottle of water. When he returned to the cargo bay, the creature was still huddled in the same spot, watching him carefully. Thomas sat down on the floor a few feet away from the creature and placed the food and water within reach. He did not want to move too close too fast. "Go ahead," he said. "It's okay." The creature looked at the food, then at Thomas, then back at the food. Slowly, it reached out and grabbed one of the protein bars. It sniffed it first, then took a small bite. The reaction was immediate. The creature's eyes widened, and it began eating faster, as if it had not had food in days. Thomas watched sadly as the small being devoured the protein bar and reached for the water bottle. He had been right about it being very hungry. "Slow down," Thomas said gently. "You'll make yourself sick if you eat too fast." The creature seemed to understand and slowed down a little. When it had finished the first protein bar, Thomas offered it another one along with some of the dried fruit. As the creature ate, Thomas studied it more closely. Despite its alien features, there was something very childlike about it. The way it held the food, the way it kept glancing at him as if asking permission, the way it seemed to curl in on itself to appear smaller. This was definitely a young one. "Do you understand me when I talk?" Thomas asked. The creature nodded. "Can you talk back?" The creature opened its mouth and made a sound that was almost like speech, but not quite. Then it seemed to think for a moment and said in a very quiet, scratchy voice, "Yes, little bit." Thomas felt his heart ache. This poor child was lost and alone on his ship, probably scared out of its mind. "What's your name?" he asked. The creature made that almost speech sound again, something with lots of clicking and whistling that Thomas could never pronounce. "That's a beautiful name," Thomas said, "but I don't think I can say it right. Would it be okay if I called you something else for now? Just until I can learn to say your real name properly?" The creature nodded. Thomas looked at how small and delicate the alien child was. "How about Pip? You're small, like a little pip seed that will grow into something strong." The creature, now called Pip, seemed to like this. It almost smiled. "Pip," it repeated in that scratchy voice. "Pip is good." Thomas offered the blanket, and Pip wrapped it around themselves gratefully. Now that the immediate needs of food and warmth had been addressed, Thomas needed to figure out what to do next. "Pip, how did you get on my ship?" he asked. Pip looked down at the blanket and was quiet for a long moment. When the words came, they were soft and sad. "Bad soldiers came. Took family. I ran. Hid in boxes. Ship moved. Family gone now." Thomas felt anger rising in his chest. Imperial raids were common on the Outer Rim worlds, but hearing about them firsthand from a child made it feel different. More real. More wrong. "I'm sorry that happened to you," he said. "That must have been very scary." Pip nodded, and Thomas could see tears starting to form in those large, dark eyes. The smart thing to do would be to turn this ship around and hand Pip over to the Imperial authorities at the next station. It was what any reasonable cargo hauler would do. It was what the law required. But as Thomas looked at this small, frightened child who had trusted him enough to accept food and a blanket, he knew he could not do it. Whatever the consequences might be, he could not hand over a scared kid to soldiers who had already taken away everything Pip loved. "Well, Pip," Thomas said, making a decision that would change both their lives forever, "I guess you're traveling with me for a while. We'll figure out how to find your family or somewhere safe for you to go." Pip looked up at him with those huge eyes, and for the first time since Thomas had found the alien child, Pip really smiled. Thomas smiled back, not knowing that this simple act of kindness would soon bring the full attention of the Mordian Empire down on both their heads. Station Kepler 7 was buzzing with nervous energy when the Imperial transport ship docked 3 days after Thomas had left. The station workers moved with quick, scared steps as they watched the black and silver ship connect to the main docking port. Everyone knew what Imperial ships meant. Someone was in serious trouble. Captain Reeves stepped off the transport with his squad of Mordian shock troops following behind him. The captain was human, which made some people think he might be easier to deal with than alien Imperial officers. Those people were wrong. Captain Reeves had earned his position by being more ruthless than most aliens, and he wore his Imperial uniform like a badge of honor. "Where is Station Commander Walsh?" Captain Reeves asked the first worker he saw. The worker pointed toward the command center with a shaking hand. "Up there, sir. 3rd level." Captain Reeves nodded and marched toward the elevator, his boots making sharp sounds on the metal floor. His soldiers spread out through the station, making everyone nervous. When Imperial troops searched a station, it usually meant someone was about to disappear. Commander Walsh was waiting in his office when Captain Reeves arrived. Walsh was an older man who had been running Kepler 7 for 15 years. He had learned to stay out of Imperial business whenever possible. "Captain Reeves," Walsh said, standing up from his desk, "what brings the Empire to my humble station?" Captain Reeves did not waste time with pleasantries. "We're looking for stolen Imperial property. A Valian youth, approximately 7 standard years old. Our records show it was last detected in this sector." Walsh tried to keep his face calm, but Captain Reeves noticed the slight twitch around his eyes. "I haven't seen any Valian children, Captain. Most of our traffic is human traders and cargo haulers." "I'm sure you understand that, hiding Imperial. Property is a crime punishable by death," Captain Reeves said quietly. "I hope for your sake that you're being completely honest with me." Walsh nodded quickly. "Of course, Captain. I'll have my people check all the security recordings from the past week. If any Valian has been through here, we'll find proof of it." Captain Reeves smiled, but it was not a friendly smile. "How helpful of you. I'll wait while you gather that information." 2 hours later, Walsh returned to his office looking pale and worried. He carried a data pad with the security footage that Captain Reeves had requested. "We found something," Walsh said reluctantly. 3 days ago, a cargo hauler named Thomas Mitchell was here for fuel and supplies. The cameras caught him talking to someone in his cargo bay, but we can't see who it was from this angle. Captain Reeves took the data pad and watched the recording. It showed Thomas Mitchell entering his cargo bay and then coming back out with an empty food container. The captain's eyes narrowed as he watched Thomas return to the cargo bay with a blanket. "Interesting," Captain Reeves said. "What do you know about this Thomas Mitchell?" Walsh consulted his records. "Independent trader, been working the Outer Rim for over 20 years. Clean record, pays his docking fees on time. He left here 3 days ago, headed for the Centauri trade route." "Did anyone else see him during his stay here?" "Well," Walsh said hesitantly, "there was something odd. My maintenance chief, Rodriguez, said he heard voices coming from Mitchell's ship when he was checking the docking connections. He thought he heard a child's voice, but when he asked Mitchell about it, Mitchell said he was just playing old recordings." Captain Reeves stood up and began pacing around the office. "A child's voice. How convenient. I want everything you have on Thomas Mitchell. His usual routes, his contacts, his business records. Everything." Walsh nodded and started typing on his computer. "I'll get you all the information we have, Captain." While Walsh worked, Captain Reeves opened his communication device and contacted his ship. "Lieutenant Barnes, I want you to put out an Empire-wide alert for cargo hauler Thomas Mitchell and his ship Morning Star. He's harboring stolen Imperial property." "Yes, sir," came the reply. "Should we classify this as a capture or terminate mission?" Captain Reeves thought for a moment. "Capture if possible. The property he's carrying is valuable, and we need it undamaged. But if Mitchell resists, you have permission to use whatever force necessary." Meanwhile, 3 systems away, Thomas was discovering just how difficult it could be to travel with a young alien. Pip was curious about everything on the ship and kept asking questions about how things worked. The child was also having nightmares and would wake up crying in the middle of the ship's night cycle. "Pip, you need to stay in the cargo bay when we dock at stations," Thomas explained as they approached their next stop. "If other people see you, they might report us to the Imperial soldiers." Pip nodded sadly. Pip understands. Soldiers are bad. They hurt Pip's family. Thomas felt his heart ache every time Pip mentioned the lost family. "I'm going to try to find out what happened to your family, okay? But it might take some time." "Thomas is good person," Pip said, looking up at him with those big dark eyes. Pip trusts Thomas. That trust made Thomas even more determined to protect the child, even though he knew the risks were growing every day they stayed together. When they docked at Haven Station, Thomas went to meet with his old friend Maria Santos. Maria ran a small cantina that was popular with independent traders, and she always knew the latest news and gossip from across the sector. "Thomas," Maria said with a warm smile when she saw him enter her cantina. "Good to see you. The usual. Drink?" "Actually, Maria, I need to talk to you about something important." Privately. Maria's expression became serious. She led him to a back room behind the bar where they could talk without being overheard. "What's wrong?" she asked. Thomas took a deep breath. "I need to know if you've heard anything about Imperial raids in the outer systems. Specifically raids targeting Valian settlements." Maria's face went pale. "Thomas, why are you asking about that? You know it's dangerous to even talk about Imperial military operations." "Because I have a Valian child on my ship," Thomas said quietly. "The kid's family was taken in a raid, and I can't just abandon him." "Are you crazy?" Maria whispered urgently. "Do you know what the Empire does to people who interfere with their operations? They don't just arrest you, Thomas. They make examples." "I know the risks," Thomas said, "but I can't hand over a scared kid to the same soldiers who destroyed his family." Maria stared at him for a long moment, then sighed. "You always were too good for your own safety. Okay, here's what I know. There have been several raids in the past month. The Empire is collecting children from conquered species for some kind of special program. Nobody knows exactly what for, but the rumors are not good." "What kind of rumors?" "They say the Empire is using psychic children to power their war machines, training them to be weapons. The younger they are, the easier they are to control." Thomas felt sick. "That's why they want Pip back. The child isn't just property to them. He's a potential weapon." "Thomas, you have to be smart about this," Maria said. "If the Empire finds out you're helping a Valian child, they'll hunt you across the galaxy. And they won't give up." As if summoned by her words, Thomas's communication device beeped with an incoming message. He looked at the screen, and his blood ran cold. It was an Empire-wide alert with his picture and ship identification. "Wanted for theft of Imperial property. Thomas Mitchell, captain of cargo vessel Morningstar. Reward, 50,000 Imperial credits. Approach with caution." Maria read the message over his shoulder and gasped. "Thomas, they already know. You have to run. Right now." Thomas stood up quickly. "I have to get back to Pip. The child is alone on my ship." "Wait," Maria said, grabbing his arm. "Take this." She handed him a communication device. "It's encrypted and connects to the Independent Trader Network. If you need help, use Channel 7 and ask for Jake Coleman. He runs supplies to some of the outer colonies that don't always follow Imperial law." Thomas took the device gratefully. "Thank you, Maria. I won't forget this." "Just stay alive, you stubborn fool," she said with tears in her eyes. Thomas hurried back to his ship, his mind racing with plans. The Empire was already hunting them, which meant their time was running out. He needed to get Pip somewhere safe, but where could they go that Imperial soldiers wouldn't follow? When he reached the Morning Star, he found Pip waiting anxiously. "In the cargo bay." "Thomas," the child said happily. "Pip was worried. You were gone long time." "We have to leave right now," Thomas said, starting the ship's engines. "The bad soldiers are looking for us." Pip's face became scared again. "They found us?" "Not yet," Thomas said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "But we can't stay here anymore. We're going to have to find somewhere else to go." As the Morning Star undocked from Haven Station and headed into space, Thomas looked at the star charts on his navigation screen. Somewhere out there was a place where a human cargo hauler and a Valian child could be safe from the Empire's reach. He just had to find it before Captain Reeves found them. Thomas had been flying for 6 days straight, jumping from system to system and avoiding the main trade routes. The Morning Star was running low on fuel, and both he and Pip were exhausted. They needed to find somewhere safe to rest, but every station they passed seemed to have Imperial ships nearby. It was during their 7th day together that Thomas discovered Pip was much more than just an ordinary alien child. Thomas had cut his hand while trying to repair a loose panel in the cargo bay. The cut was deeper than he thought, and blood was dripping onto the floor. Pip saw what happened and rushed over to him. "Thomas hurt," Pip said with worry in that small voice. "It's okay. Just a little cut," Thomas said, wrapping his hand in a cloth. "I'll be fine." But Pip reached out and gently touched Thomas's wrapped hand. Suddenly, Thomas felt a warm, tingling sensation spread up his arm. The pain from the cut disappeared completely. "What did you do?" Thomas asked, unwrapping his hand. Where the deep cut had been, there was now only smooth, unbroken skin. Not even. A scar remained. Pip looked scared, as if expecting Thomas to be angry. "Pip, fix hurt. Pip, sorry. Should not do without permission." Thomas stared at his perfectly healed hand in amazement. "Pip, that was incredible. How did you do that?" "Pip has gift," the child said quietly. "All Pip's people have gifts, but Empire says gifts belong to them now." "What kind of gifts?" Thomas asked gently. Pip was quiet for a moment, then said, "Pip can fix hurt, can feel what others feel, can talk without words sometimes." Thomas sat down beside Pip, his mind racing. No wonder the Empire wanted Valian children so badly. If they all had abilities like this, they would be incredibly valuable to a military force. "Pip, can you show me the talking without words?" Pip nodded and placed a small hand on Thomas's forehead. Suddenly, Thomas could hear Pip's voice inside his mind, as clear as if the child was speaking out loud. "Like this, Thomas. Pip can share thoughts and feelings." Thomas jerked back in surprise. "That's amazing, Pip, but also very dangerous if the wrong people find out about it." "Empire knows," Pip said sadly. "They use gifts to make children into weapons, force children to hurt others with gifts." Thomas felt anger building in his chest. Again. The idea of forcing children to use their abilities as weapons was horrible. No wonder Pip's family had tried to run. Over the next few hours, Pip told Thomas more about the Valian people. They had once been a peaceful civilization that used their psychic abilities to heal the sick and help their communities. But when the Mordian Empire conquered their world, everything changed. "Empire takes children when gifts start showing," Pip explained. "Teaches children to use gifts for war. Children who resist get hurt bad." "Is that why you were hiding on my ship? Were you trying to escape from the Empire's training program?" Pip nodded. "Soldiers came for Pip. Mother and father fought to protect, but too many soldiers. Pip ran and hid until ship left planet." Thomas realized that Pip had been through something even worse than he had imagined. The child had not just lost family members, but had been specifically targeted by the Empire for forced military service. That evening, Thomas used the encrypted communication device that Maria had given him. He followed her instructions and contacted Channel 7 asking for Jake Coleman. "This is Jake," came a voice through the static. "Maria said someone might call." "I'm Thomas Mitchell. I think you know why I'm calling." "Yeah, I heard about your situation. Half the sector is talking about the bounty on your head. You picked a dangerous time to grow a conscience, friend." "I couldn't leave the child," Thomas said simply. There was a pause. Then Jake said, "I respect that. Listen, I might be able to help you. But first I need to know something. Is it true what they're saying about Valian children having special abilities?" Thomas looked over at Pip, who was sleeping curled up in the blanket. "Yes, it's true. The child I'm protecting has healing and telepathic powers." "Then you're carrying something more dangerous than you realize," Jake said seriously. The Empire has been collecting psychic children from dozens of species. They're building some kind of army of mind-controlled soldiers. How do you know all this? Because I've been helping families escape from Imperial raids for the past 2 years. There's a whole network of people like us trying to get refugee children to safety. Thomas felt a spark of hope for the first time since this whole situation began. There are others doing what I'm doing? More than you might think. Independent traders, colony administrators, even some Imperial officers who got sick of following orders they knew were wrong. Imperial officers? Yeah, there's a lieutenant named David Cross who's been feeding us information about upcoming raids. He saved dozens of families by warning them in advance. Thomas was amazed. He had thought he was alone in this fight, but there were actually other people working to protect innocent children from the Empire's plans. Jake, I need to get this child somewhere safe. Do you know anywhere the Empire can't reach? There are a few places. Remote colonies that don't officially exist. Asteroid mining stations that stay off the Imperial charts. But getting there won't be easy. Captain Reeves has put ships at every major hyperspace junction. Captain Reeves? The Imperial officer. Hunting you. He's got a reputation for never giving up once he starts chasing someone. But he also has a weakness. What kind of weakness? He's human, like us, and some of his own officers are starting to question why they're chasing children instead of real criminals. Jake gave Thomas coordinates for a meeting point in the Titan, Nebula, where the gas clouds would hide ships from Imperial sensors. I'll bring some friends. We can figure out how to get your child to safety and maybe help some other families while we're at it. 2 days later, Thomas guided the Morning Star into the swirling purple clouds of the Titan Nebula. The nebula was beautiful but dangerous, with electrical storms that could fry a ship's electronics if a pilot wasn't careful. Following Jake's directions, Thomas found a small asteroid that had been hollowed out and turned into a hidden base. 3 other ships were already docked there. Jake Coleman turned out to be a man about Thomas's age, with graying hair and kind eyes. He introduced Thomas to the others. Susan Wright, a former Imperial medical officer who now treated refugee families, and Bobby Chen, a mining engineer who had been helping families hide in abandoned asteroid bases. This is quite an operation you have here, Thomas said as he looked around the hidden base. It started small, Jake explained. Just a few people who couldn't stand watching children get taken from their families, but word spreads when you do good work. Susan examined Pip and confirmed that the child was healthy but showed signs of trauma from witnessing violence. Many of the children we've helped have similar symptoms. The Empire's raids are brutal, designed to terrorize entire populations. What I don't understand, Thomas said, is why the Empire needs children specifically. Couldn't they train adult soldiers to use these psychic abilities? Bobby answered. From what we've learned, psychic abilities are strongest in children and become harder to control as people get older. Adult psychics can resist mental conditioning, but children can be molded into whatever the Empire wants them to be. The thought made Thomas sick. So they're basically kidnapping children to turn them into slaves. Worse than slaves, Susan said grimly. Slaves can rebel or escape. These children are having their minds altered so they can't even think about resisting. As they talked, Pip had been sitting quietly nearby, listening to everything. Suddenly, the child stood up and walked over to Thomas. Thomas, Pip said, Pip can feel others like Pip nearby. What do you mean? Pip pointed toward one of the walls of the asteroid base. Children like Pip, scared children, not far from here. Jake checked his scanner and found what Pip had sensed. There's an Imperial transport ship about 2 hours away. It's heavily guarded. Susan looked at the scanner readings. That ship matches the design of the vessels they use to transport captured children to their training facilities. Thomas looked at Pip, then at the other adults. How many children are on that ship? Scanner shows about 30 life signs, Bobby said. Thomas felt something change inside him. A few weeks ago, he had been just a cargo hauler trying to make an honest living. Now he was part of a group planning to rescue children from Imperial kidnappers. "We can't just let that ship take 30 children to become weapons," he said. Jake smiled grimly. "I was hoping you'd say that, because I think I know how we can stop them." As they began planning their first real strike against the Empire, Thomas realized that his simple act of feeding a hungry child had led him to something much bigger than he had ever imagined. He was no longer just protecting Pip. He was joining a fight to protect all the innocent children the Empire wanted to steal. The rescue mission was successful beyond anything Thomas had hoped for. Jake's plan worked perfectly. They had disabled the Imperial transport ship's engines and rescued all 30 children before the escort fighters could respond. But their victory came with a terrible cost. Emperor Valdris himself learned about the rescue within hours. The ruler of the Mordian Empire had not built his power by ignoring threats, no matter how small they seemed. When his advisors told him that a group of humans had attacked an Imperial ship and freed valuable psychic assets, the Emperor became very interested. "Show me the recordings from the transport ship," Emperor Valdris commanded from his throne room on the Imperial capital world. The holographic display showed the rescue operation. The Emperor watched Thomas Mitchell leading the attack, saw the human cargo hauler personally carrying frightened children to safety. But what made the Emperor lean forward in his throne was the small blue figure helping the other children stay calm during the rescue. "That Valian child," the Emperor said, slowly. "Run a psychic resonance scan on the recording." His chief scientist worked at the controls for several minutes, then looked up with wide eyes. "Your Majesty, the readings are incredible. This child shows psychic power levels we have never recorded before." Emperor Valdris stood up from his throne. In his 300 years of rule, he had conquered 47 star systems and enslaved dozens of species. He had seen many powerful psychic individuals, but none like this. "This child could disrupt our control networks across entire sectors," the Emperor said. "Find it. Bring it to me alive." "Yes, Your Majesty. Should we continue using Captain Reeves for this mission?" The Emperor considered this. Captain Reeves was effective, but this situation required someone with more experience in handling extremely dangerous targets. "No. Send Commander Kane and the Crimson Guard. This Thomas Mitchell has become more than just a cargo hauler helping, a lost child. He has become a symbol of resistance. That makes him dangerous to our rule." Commander Kane was the Emperor's most feared officer. He had crushed rebellions on 12 worlds and never failed to complete a mission. His Crimson Guard soldiers were the elite of the Imperial military, trained to handle any threat to the Empire's power. Meanwhile, Thomas and the resistance group had taken the rescued children to a hidden base on the abandoned mining world of Tertius Prime. The planet had been stripped of all valuable minerals years ago and left empty, making it perfect for hiding refugees. Thomas watched Pip playing with some of the other rescued children in the main cavern they had turned into a living area. It was amazing to see how quickly the children had bonded together, despite coming from different alien species. "Thomas, you need to see this," Susan called from the medical area where she had been examining the rescued children. Thomas walked over to find Susan, looking worried. "What's wrong?" "It's not what's wrong, it's what's incredible," Susan said. "These children are all showing signs of psychic ability, just like Pip. But more than that, they seem to be connecting with each other." "What do you mean, connecting?" Susan pointed to a group of children sitting in a circle. They were from different species, but they all had their eyes closed and were moving their hands in the same pattern. "They're sharing thoughts and emotions," Susan explained. "Pip is somehow teaching the others to use their abilities together." Thomas walked closer to the children and watched in amazement. Even though they could not speak each other's languages, they seemed to be communicating perfectly. Jake joined them and shook his head in wonder. If the Empire knew that psychic children could work together like this, they would stop at nothing to capture them all. Maybe that's exactly why we need to protect them, Thomas said. If these children can connect with each other, maybe they can also connect with other psychic children who are still trapped by the Empire. Over the next few weeks, their hidden base on Tertius Prime grew as more resistance fighters arrived with rescued families. Bobby had set up communication equipment that let them coordinate with other resistance cells across the galaxy. The reports they received were encouraging. More and more people were refusing to cooperate with Imperial raids, and some Imperial officers were beginning to defect. Lieutenant David Cross was one of those officers. He arrived at Tertius Prime 3 weeks after the transport ship rescue, bringing intelligence about Imperial operations and a group of soldiers who had decided they could no longer follow orders to hurt innocent families. "The Empire is getting desperate," David told Thomas and the other resistance leaders. "They're pulling ships from border patrol duties to search for this base, but they're also dealing with rebellions on 6 different worlds." "What kind of rebellions?" Jake asked. "Families whose children were taken are fighting back. Entire communities are refusing to cooperate with Imperial forces. Some planets are even declaring independence." Thomas felt a surge of hope. "So we're not alone in this fight anymore." "Not even close," David said with a smile. "What you did by rescuing those children has inspired people across the galaxy. The Empire always said resistance was impossible. But you proved them wrong." But their celebration was cut short when Bobby's scanners detected a large fleet of Imperial ships approaching their sector. "How many ships?" Thomas asked. Bobby's face was pale as he read the scanner. 30 Imperial cruisers and twice as many fighter escorts. "This isn't a search mission, Thomas. This is an invasion force." Through the communication equipment, they received a transmission on all Imperial frequencies. It was Commander Kane himself. "Attention rebels on Tertius Prime. You are harboring stolen Imperial property and interfering with legitimate military operations. Surrender the psychic assets immediately, and your deaths will be quick." Thomas looked around at the faces of the people who had become his friends and allies. They had known this day would come eventually. The Empire could not allow their resistance to continue growing. "We can't fight 30 cruisers," Jake said quietly. "No," Thomas agreed. "But we can make sure the children escape." Susan had been working with Pip and the other children to develop their combined psychic abilities. If they could get the children to safety, their growing network of psychic communication could spread across the galaxy and inspire even more resistance. "How long do we have?" Thomas asked Bobby. 6 hours until they reach the planet. Maybe 8, if we're lucky." Thomas made a decision that would change everything. "We evacuate the children first. Everyone else prepares to hold off the Imperial forces for as long as possible." Pip walked up to Thomas and took his hand. "Thomas scared. Pip can feel it." Thomas knelt down to look into those big dark eyes. "Yes, I'm scared, Pip. But I'm not scared for me. I'm scared that the bad soldiers will hurt you and the other children." "Pip not want Thomas to get hurt either," the child said softly. "I know, little one. But sometimes, good people have to take risks to protect others. That's what makes them good people." As they prepared for the coming battle, Thomas realized that his simple act of feeding a hungry child had led to something he never could have imagined. He was no longer just a cargo hauler. He had become a leader in a fight that would determine the future of countless innocent lives. The Empire was coming for them with overwhelming force. But Thomas and his friends had something the Empire did not understand. They had hope, and they had each other. Most importantly, they had children whose growing psychic abilities were already reaching out to other trapped children across the galaxy. The battle for Tertius Prime would decide more than just the fate of one hidden base. It would determine whether the spark of resistance they had lit would spread into a fire that could burn away the Empire's cruel rule forever. The Imperial fleet arrived at Tertius Prime exactly when Bobby's calculations predicted. Commander Kane's ships filled the sky above the mining world like a dark cloud, blocking out the light from the system's twin stars. From the hidden base, Thomas watched through the periscope as landing ships began descending toward the planet's surface. Most of the children had already been evacuated through underground tunnels that led to a secret launch pad on the far side of the planet. Jake and Susan were leading them to safety aboard fast ships that could outrun Imperial fighters. But Pip had refused to leave with the others. "Pip stays with Thomas," the child had said firmly when Thomas tried to convince the young Valian to go with the evacuation group. "It's too dangerous, Pip. The soldiers are coming specifically to capture you. Other children need Pip's help. Pip can feel trapped children on big ships. They calling for help." Thomas realized what Pip meant. The Imperial fleet probably carried psychic children who were being forced to work for the Empire. Pip's growing abilities could reach out to them, maybe even help them break free from Imperial control. "Okay, Pip. But you'll have to promise to stay hidden and do exactly what I tell you." David Cross had stayed behind with a group of his defected Imperial soldiers to help defend the base. They had set up defensive positions in the main cavern and armed themselves with weapons taken from captured Imperial ships. "How long do you think we can hold them off?" David asked Thomas as they watched the first Imperial landing craft touch down near the base entrance. "Long enough for the children to get to safety," Thomas replied. "After that, we'll see what happens." Bobby had rigged the base with a powerful communication transmitter that could broadcast across multiple star systems. If they were going to make their last stand, Thomas wanted the galaxy to know why they were fighting. "Bobby, is the transmitter ready?" Thomas called. "All set. When you give the word, we'll be broadcasting on every frequency the Empire uses." Thomas took a deep breath and picked up the communication device. This might be his last chance to tell people what the Empire was really doing to innocent children. "This is Thomas Mitchell, speaking from Tertius Prime. Imperial forces are attacking our base because we rescued 30 children from slavery. These children have special abilities that the Empire wants to use as weapons. But children should not be weapons. They should be protected and loved and given the chance to grow up in peace." He paused, looking at the faces of the people who had chosen to stay and fight with him. "The Empire tells you that resistance is impossible. They want you to believe that their power is too great to challenge. But we are proof that they are wrong. Every person who chooses to help instead of hurt, every person who protects the innocent instead of looking away, every person who stands up for what is right, is a victory against their darkness." Through the periscope, Thomas could see Imperial soldiers approaching the base entrance. Commander Kane himself was leading them, his red armor gleaming in the dim light. "If we don't survive this battle, remember that it started with a simple choice. I found a hungry child and decided to share my food. That one small act of kindness led to all of this. It led to children being rescued, families being reunited, and people finding the courage to stand against tyranny." The first explosions rocked the base as Imperial soldiers began their attack. Thomas could hear blaster fire echoing through the tunnels. The Empire thinks that fear and violence make them strong, but they are wrong. Love makes us strong. Compassion makes us strong. The willingness to sacrifice for others makes us strong. And no matter what happens to us today, that strength will live on in everyone who hears this message. David and his soldiers were fighting desperately at the main entrance, but they were vastly outnumbered. Imperial shock troops were advancing through the tunnels, getting closer to the central cavern where Thomas and Pip were hiding. Pip suddenly grabbed Thomas's arm. "Thomas, Pip can feel them. The children on the big ships. They heard broadcast. They awakening." "What do you mean awakening?" "Children remembering who they were before Empire took them. Pip's words helping them break free from mind control." Thomas realized that their broadcast was doing more than just inspiring resistance. Pip's psychic abilities were being carried along with the transmission, reaching out to every psychic child in the Imperial fleet above them. "Keep talking, Thomas," Pip said urgently. "Help Pip reach more children." Thomas keyed the transmitter, again even as blaster bolts began hitting the walls around them. "To every child who can hear this, you are not alone. You are not property. You are not weapons. You are precious and loved and worthy of freedom. Fight back against those who would use you. Remember your families. Remember your homes. Remember that you have the power to choose your own destiny. Suddenly, the sounds of battle began to change. Through the communication equipment, they could hear confused voices from the Imperial ships in orbit. Command, we're getting reports of system failures across the fleet. The psychic control networks are going offline. Sir, the child assets are not responding to commands. Commander Kane's voice cut through the chatter with angry authority. Shut down all communications and increase suppression protocols on the assets immediately. But it was too late. Pip smiled as psychic energy flowed through the small Valian child. Too many children awakening now. Empire cannot stop them all. On the Imperial ships above Tertius Prime, dozens of psychic children who had been enslaved and mind-controlled were remembering who they really were. Some of them began using their abilities to disable weapon systems. Others reached out telepathically to more children on other Imperial ships across the galaxy. The effect spread like wildfire. Within hours, Imperial forces were dealing with rebellions and system failures on hundreds of worlds as their enslaved psychic children broke free from mental conditioning. But in the base on Tertius Prime, the situation was getting desperate. David and his soldiers had been forced back to the main cavern, and Imperial troops were closing in from multiple directions. "Thomas, we can't hold them much longer," David called out as he fired at advancing soldiers. Thomas looked at Pip, who was still concentrating on maintaining the psychic connection with children across the galaxy. The young Valian's efforts were freeing thousands of enslaved children, but it was taking all of Pip's strength. "Pip, you need to go now. Take the emergency tunnel to the launch pad. Jake left a ship there for emergencies." "No leave, Thomas," Pip said without opening those big dark eyes. "You have to, Pip. You're the only one who can keep helping the other children. I'll hold off the soldiers and give you time to escape." Thomas picked up a blaster rifle and moved toward the tunnel entrance where Imperial soldiers were trying to break through. He had never been a soldier, but he knew how to be brave when it mattered. "Tell the galaxy that Thomas Mitchell died protecting children," he said into the transmitter one last time. "And tell them that his sacrifice was worth it if even one child lives free because of it." As Imperial soldiers poured into the cavern, Thomas Mitchell, cargo hauler turned hero, made his final stand. Behind him, Pip finally opened those dark eyes, tears streaming down the small blue face. "Thomas," Pip whispered. "Pip will never forget." The child slipped away through the emergency tunnel, carrying with him the psychic network that would spread Thomas's message of hope and resistance across the entire galaxy. Above them, the Imperial fleet was in chaos as their enslaved child. Soldiers continued to rebel. Commander Kane had won the battle for Tertius Prime, but he was losing the war for the Empire's control over its psychic assets. Thomas Mitchell's simple act of feeding a hungry child had become a galactic revolution. 3 years had passed since the Battle of Tertius Prime, and the galaxy was a very different place. The Mordian Empire, which had once seemed unstoppable, was crumbling under the weight of constant rebellions. What had started with one cargo, hauler feeding a hungry child, had become a revolution that spread across hundreds of star systems. Alex, who had once been called Pip, stood on the observation deck of the space station New Haven and watched ships arriving from across the galaxy. Each ship carried families who had escaped from Imperial control, children who had been freed from slavery, and former Imperial soldiers who had chosen to fight for freedom instead of tyranny. Alex was no longer the small, scared child that Thomas had found hiding in his cargo bay. The young Valian had grown both in size and in power, but more importantly, Alex had grown in wisdom and compassion. The psychic abilities that the Empire had wanted to use as weapons had instead become tools for healing and hope. "The morning refugee transport is requesting permission to dock," came a voice over the communication system. Permission granted, Alex replied, using the communication skills that Jake Coleman had taught years ago. Direct them to Docking Bay 7. New Haven was one of 12 space stations that the Free Worlds Alliance had built to help refugees and coordinate resistance activities. Alex had helped design the stations to be welcoming places where families could heal from the trauma of Imperial oppression. Colonel Patricia Hayes entered the observation deck, carrying a data pad with the latest reports from across the galaxy. Patricia had once been a high-ranking officer in the Earth Defense Force, but she had left her military career to help lead the resistance against the Empire. "The news keeps getting better," Patricia said with a smile. 3 more Imperial sectors declared independence this week. That brings the total to 47 systems that have broken away from Valdris's control. "What about the Emperor himself?" Alex asked. "Our intelligence sources say he's holed up on the Imperial capital with what's left of his fleet. Commander Kane is still hunting for you, but most of his ships are dealing with rebellions on their own worlds." Alex nodded thoughtfully. The young Valian had learned that victory in war was not just about winning battles, but about building something better to replace what was destroyed. "Have we heard anything new from the Rescue Network?" The Rescue Network was what people now called the Group of Independent Traders, former Imperial officers, and ordinary citizens who worked together to free enslaved children and reunite families. Jake Coleman coordinated much of their work from a hidden base in the Andromeda sector. "Jake's latest report says they rescued 86 children this month," Patricia said proudly, "including 15 from a slave camp that Commander Kane thought was secret." Alex felt a warm glow of satisfaction. Every rescued child was a victory that honored Thomas Mitchell's memory. Dr. Susan Wright joined them on the observation deck. Susan had become the Alliance's chief medical officer and was responsible for treating the physical and emotional wounds that Imperial cruelty had left on thousands of families. "Alex, the Council of Free Worlds wants to schedule another meeting with you about the Memorial Project," Susan said. The Memorial Project was something that Alex had been working on for over a year. The Free Worlds Alliance wanted to build a monument to honor Thomas Mitchell and all the other heroes who had died fighting the Empire. But Alex wanted it to be more than just a statue. "I want the memorial to be a place where children can learn about compassion and courage," Alex said. "Thomas always said that small acts of kindness could change the world. The memorial should teach people that lesson." "The Council loves your ideas," Susan said. "They've approved the funding for the full project. Construction will begin next month on New Terra." New Terra was the capital world of the Free Worlds Alliance, a planet that had been one of the first to declare independence from the Empire. It was also where many of the children rescued from Imperial slavery had chosen to make their new homes. As they talked, Alex's psychic abilities picked up something that made the young Valian turn toward the docking bays. A familiar mind was approaching New Haven, someone Alex had not sensed in over a year. "David Cross is back," Alex announced. David had spent the past year working undercover in Imperial territory, helping to organize rebellions and rescue operations. His work was dangerous, but it had saved thousands of lives. They made their way to Docking Bay 7, where David's ship was just finishing the docking procedure. When the airlock opened, David stepped out looking tired but happy. Behind him came a group of 23 children from 6 different alien species. "Another successful mission," David said with a grin. These kids were being held at an Imperial training facility on Rigel Prime. The facility's commanding officer decided he'd rather defect than train children to be weapons. Alex knelt down to greet the children, using psychic abilities to send feelings of safety and welcome to them. Many of them were scared and confused, but they could sense that Alex understood what they had been through. "Welcome to New Haven," Alex said gently. "You're safe now. No one will ever force you to use your abilities to hurt others again." One of the children, a small reptilian being with golden scales, looked up at Alex with large, curious eyes. "Are you the one they call the Hope Bringer?" Alex smiled. That was a name some of the rescued children had started using, though Alex had never asked for such a title. "I'm just someone who wants to help," Alex replied. "Just like Thomas Mitchell helped me when I was scared and alone." Over the following weeks, Alex worked with Susan and the other counselors to help the new children adjust to their freedom. It was always a slow process. Many of them had been conditioned by the Empire to believe that their only value was as weapons or tools. But gradually, as they were shown kindness and given choices about their own lives, the children began to heal. Alex particularly enjoyed the moments when they would laugh or play games, remembering what it felt like to simply be children. One evening, Alex received a priority communication from Jake Coleman. The message was brief, but exciting. "Alex, you need to see the latest intelligence reports. The Imperial fleet guarding the capital has split up. Half the ships are dealing with rebellions, and the other half are searching for you. This might be our chance to end this war once and for all." Alex shared the message with Patricia and the other Alliance leaders. They had been planning for this possibility for months. If they could capture or neutralize Emperor Valdris, the remaining Imperial forces would likely surrender or fragment into smaller, manageable groups. "It's risky," Patricia warned. "If we fail, the Empire will crush the remaining free worlds." "If we don't try, the war could go on for decades," Alex replied. "How many more children will suffer while we wait for a perfect opportunity?" The decision was made to launch Operation Freedom Star, a coordinated attack on the Imperial capital that would combine military strikes with psychic warfare. Alex would lead a team of rescued psychic children in an attempt to break the mental conditioning of any enslaved children still serving the Empire. As they prepared for what might be the final battle of the war, Alex thought about Thomas Mitchell and the simple choice he had made 3 years ago. Thomas had seen a hungry child and decided to share his food. That one act of compassion had grown into a movement that freed an entire galaxy. 6 months later, Alex stood in a place that would have seemed impossible just a few years earlier. The young Valian was on the steps of the Imperial Palace on the capital world, watching as the last symbols of the Mordian Empire were removed. Emperor Valdris had been captured 2 weeks earlier when his own psychic children turned against him. Commander Kane had died in the final battle, still refusing to believe that his empire could be defeated by inferior species and rebellious children. The war was over. The galaxy was free. Today was the day they would unveil the memorial to Thomas Mitchell and all the heroes who had died fighting for freedom. Representatives from hundreds of worlds had come to attend the ceremony, including many of the children whose lives had been saved by the resistance. Alex stepped up to the podium that had been set up in front of the memorial. The monument was beautiful in its simplicity. A statue of Thomas Mitchell kneeling down to offer food to a small alien child with the inscription, "He saw a hungry child and chose compassion over fear. In that choice, he freed a galaxy." 3 years ago, a cargo hauler named Thomas Mitchell found me hiding in his ship, Alex began, speaking to the crowd of thousands who had gathered for the ceremony. "I was scared, hungry, and alone. Thomas could have turned me over to the Imperial soldiers who were hunting me. Instead, he chose to feed me, protect me, and treat me with kindness." Alex paused, looking out at the faces in the crowd. Former slaves, resistance fighters, defected Imperial officers, and children from dozens of different species all listened intently. "Thomas taught me that the most powerful force in the universe is not weapons or armies or empires. It is compassion. It is the choice to help someone who needs help, even when that choice is dangerous. It is the decision to do what is right, even when what is right is not easy." The young Valian gestured toward the memorial statue. "This monument honors Thomas Mitchell, but it also honors every person who made the choice to help instead of hurt, to protect instead of destroy, to hope instead of despair. It honors all of you." Alex stepped down from the podium and placed the first flower at the base of the memorial. It was a simple white flower from Thomas's home world of Earth, representing the purity of his intentions and the hope that his sacrifice had made possible. One by one, the crowd came forward to place their own flowers and tokens of remembrance. Children who had been rescued from slavery, parents who had been reunited with their families, soldiers who had found the courage to defect from the empire, and ordinary citizens who had chosen to help refugees rather than turn them away. As the ceremony concluded and people began to disperse, Alex remained by the memorial. The young Valian thought about all the changes that had come from one simple act of kindness. Thomas Mitchell had given food to a lonely alien child, and in doing so, he had changed the course of galactic history. "Thank you, Thomas," Alex whispered to the statue. "I promise that your lesson will live on. I will teach others about compassion, and they will teach others, and your legacy will spread across the stars forever." A small group of children approached the memorial, led by Dr. Susan Wright. They were some of the newest refugees, children who had been rescued just days earlier from the last imperial slave camp. "Alex," one of them said shyly, "Dr. Wright told us you would teach us about the man who started the Freedom War." Alex smiled and knelt down to their level, just as Thomas had once knelt down to offer food to a scared alien child. "I would be honored to tell you about Thomas Mitchell," Alex said. "He was the kindest, bravest person I ever knew. And do you know how his story began?" The children shook their heads, eager to hear. "It began with him seeing someone who needed help and choosing to help them, just like how your stories of freedom begin today, with people who chose to help you." As Alex began telling the story of Thomas Mitchell to a new generation of children, the memorial statue seemed to glow in the light of the setting sun. The cargo hauler's legacy would live on, passed down from child to child, ensuring that compassion and courage would always triumph over cruelty and fear. The galaxy was free, and it would remain free as long as people remembered the simple truth that Thomas Mitchell had lived and died for, that one person's choice to show kindness can change everything.